What's happening? I'm Will, aka Sir William, and in today's video, I'm going to show you how to wire your 12-volt fridge up for full-time power in the back of your rig. As a bonus, I'm going to show you how to get a little bit more juice out of your alternator if you drive a Toyota. Let's go ahead and get started. Now, if you've already been subscribed to the channel, you've probably heard me say numerous times before that a fridge is an absolute game changer when you're on the trail. If you're not subscribed to the channel, well, you should be, because I do some pretty cool shit. I've been overlanding around the United States in Apple here in my 2015 Toyota 4Runner since 2016, and since 2017, I've had some sort of refrigerator in the back running on full-time power, and today I want to show you how to do that. Before we get started, I have to give you the quick disclaimer, which is I am in no way, shape, or form an expert on this subject, and this is not necessarily the only way to get full-time power on the inside of your rig, and it might not even be the right way. This is simply the way that I did it, and it's worked since 2017 with no problem. My goal here today is to provide you with quick and easy reference for you to build your own full-time power setup in the back of your overlanding rig. With that said, you guys do this at your own risk. Let's go ahead and get started. Now, everything that I use for this project, with the exception of the battery, you can get on Amazon, and I'll leave the links down in the description below. By using those links to get your supplies, it does pay me a small commission that's not charged to you, and it just helps put beer in my belly and gas in the truck, so I really appreciate you doing so. But first, we're going to start with the battery. This is an X2 power battery from Batteries Plus. It's a deep cycle battery. You don't have to change your battery. You can do this with a stock battery. However, you're not going to get really long run times, and you're probably going to run it dead pretty quickly. Also, the stock battery's chemical makeup makes it to where if you do run it dead, you could damage the cells in it, making the battery inoperable. So I highly recommend upgrading the battery. This is an X2 power battery from Batteries Plus. It's a fantastic battery. It is a little bit more expensive. I want to say it's somewhere around the $300 mark or a little bit higher than that. But it is a deep cycle battery, and a deep cycle battery allows you to deeply discharge the battery and then charge it back up without causing a whole lot of damage. Now, battery experts out there will tell you shouldn't run a deep cell battery less than 50% of its capacity and blah, 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 blah. I'm not a battery expert. I just know that this is a deep cycle battery. I've ran it dead a couple times, quite a few times as a matter of fact. One, in testing other products, and two, just to see how long the fridge would last, and three, on accident. But a deep cycle battery is definitely what you need. Batteries Plus is particularly nice because they are nationwide, and they have a 5-year warranty on this battery, no questions asked, 100% warranty, so it's not prorated like some of the other warranties out there. As a matter of fact, I bought the battery back in 2017, and my warranty went bad June 2022. In February of 2022, I started to have problems with the battery I had in. I went to a Batteries Plus that was on the other side of the United States, and I was able to switch it out, and I got a brand new battery with no charge. So yeah, X2 power, Batteries Plus, highly recommend, but you must have some sort of a deep cell battery. Group 24 is stock size. If you want to go up, I've heard of people doing 31, 34, different things like that. That's on you. Do your own research. Let's move on to the next component. The next component you see here is a 40 amp inline fuse. Now, the 40 amp inline fuse is absolutely mandatory. You're going to want to put this 40 amp inline fuse here, and the fuse that I use is actually for wiring up an amplifier. So if you're going to put like a sound system in a truck or a car, you would use a similar style inline fuse here. Pretty sure that you could go with some of the other different styles out there. This is just the one that I went with. You could do some research, but again, this is what I went with. I also went with 8-gauge wire. So 8-gauge wire is sufficient enough to run from the battery all the way to the rear where I have the full-time power hooked up. And the way that I know that is because there's multiple different charts online that tell you the type gauge wire that you need to transfer 12-volt power from different distances. So go look up those charts online. I'll try to provide a link down in the description below for one of those charts, so that way you can see what gauge wire you need. But I went with 8-gauge wire. Now, I think that it goes without saying, but it's 2022, and you know, dummies. Make sure that you disconnect your battery before you go working on it. I don't think that you can really injure yourself by getting shocked with 12-volt batteries, if that's even a thing, but you can harm some of the electronics or some of the other components in your truck if something happens. So disconnect your battery. Let's continue. So the very first thing that I did was I took my 8-gauge wire and I stripped it back a little bit, and I made a nice, secure, waterproof connection right here. I'm not going to tell you how to do these connections. I'm just going to tell you need a nice, secure, waterproof connection, and then I hooked it to the positive terminal on the battery. Now that we've got our nice, secure, and watertight connection here on the positive side, we're going to run the wire over to our inline fuse here. We're going to cut it, we're going to strip it back a little bit, and we're going to make a nice, secure connection into one end here. And then we're going to take the remaining of our 8-gauge wire, the length that we need, and we're going to hook it into the other end here. Now the way that you go through the firewall is going to be dependent on your application. In the 4Runner here, there was a nice neat little hole that I used, and I ran right through that little hole, and then down behind the dashboard, behind the trim, and then up underneath the side trim all the way to the back. Let's go check that out. All right, welcome to the back of Apple, and pardon the mess, I literally live out of this thing. Now back here you have a couple different options. So one option is you can purchase one of these kits online. I'll leave a link down in the description. I think ARB makes one, 𝐷𝐵ETIC may make one, but it's basically a hardwire kit, which essentially does everything that I'm talking about doing, and then at the very end you have a cigarette lighter style plug. The only problem that I found is these are absolute garbage. These things wiggle loose, they come out. There's all kinds of problems with these. So let me show you what I did. So back here in the back where I have the access panel for, as you can see, the jack there and the tool kit, this is a cool little spot that the 4Runner came with. And I got one of these fancy, and I use the term fancy very loosely, 6-spot fuse blocks. I don't know exactly what you call it, but anyway, there's 6 different power spots here. The reason that I went with this is because 1, I wanted to eliminate that cigarette lighter adapter, and 2, I wanted to have some additional ports over here. As you can see, I've got a cigarette lighter here, a voltmeter here, as well as 2 USB ports. I'm not going to get into how I wired these up, but it's pretty much the same exact way that I wired up the fridge. But let's focus on the fridge. So as you can see here, this is that 8-gauge wire running from that inline fuse up underneath the hood, and it's ran all the way back. I've got the cover off of this 6-slot fuse block. This is the power port, and what I did was I ran that 8-gauge wire with a nice secure connection onto that power post that you see there into that 6-slot fuse block. Now you've got power to this 6-slot fuse block, but there's still a couple things that you need to do in order to get your fridge to work. So in order to hardwire your fridge into that fuse block, here's what you're going to have to do. Your wire that came with your 12-volt fridge probably looks identical to this. And if you look up real close, you'll see that this has white lettering on one side and no lettering on the other. Now you could take a gamble and you could assume that the side with the white lettering actually is the power side or the positive side, and the other side is the negative side. However, I recommend that you be sure of yourself by plugging the 12-volt into the 12-volt lighter that's got power to it. You want to make sure it's got power. Plug this into a 12-volt outlet, and then take a voltmeter, which is like 10 bucks if you don't have one. Hell, you could buy one from Walmart and return it if you're really that cheap. But it's probably a good thing to have one of those anyway if you're going to be messing around with wiring up stuff in your truck. At any rate, plug this in, make sure that you got power to it, and then test each side to see which side has 12 volts to it. And you'll likely find that the side with the white lettering on it is the side that is the positive. Once you figure that out, what you're going to do is you're going to cut this adapter off, and you want to make sure that you have it the length that you need. So if you don't need this full length, then cut it a little bit shorter. I always like to err on the side of caution, so I'd say cut it right here next to the cord. Then what you're going to do is, it looks like these are molded together, but they're actually not. You can actually break them apart pretty easily. So pull them apart, and I'd say pull them apart till about that much right there. So pull them apart, make sure that they're completely separated. And then on the positive side, what you're going to do is you're going to strip it back, and you're going to put one of these blade style connectors that are right here. One of these blade style connectors. Make sure that it's the right gauge for this wire. I want to say that this is a 16 gauge. I can't remember. But anyway, it's going to say it on your cord. But make sure that it's the right size. And if it doesn't say it on your cord, then get one of those variety packs and just test it until it is the right size. Make sure that you got a nice, strong, secure connection with that blade style connector. This is very important. It's got to be that blade style connector on the positive side of your fridge plug. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take the negative side, you're going to strip it back just like you did with the positive side, and then you're going to put a nice, secure, connected, round style connector, like this one right here. So the round style connector goes on the negative, nice and securely, and the blade style connector goes on the positive. nice and securely. Then what you're going to do is you're going to find a nice ground. Now I'm lucky because the 4Runner actually has a really nice spot for a ground right up here by the tail light, as you can see here. This is a nice secure ground to the body, and you want to make sure that it's a nice secure ground, because if you don't have a good ground, it can cause all sorts of headaches. So now that you got all your connectors on, you're going to go ahead and connect the negative to that ground, and then you're going to connect the positive onto the blade of that 6-slot fuse block, as you see here. Now, I am using the 20 amp fuse, which I think is suitable. You could do some research. I'm sure there's some experts that'll probably chime in down here at the bottom and say, no, that's horribly wrong. You're going to catch everything on fire. Or they're not, and they're just going to say, hey, man, good job. But 20 amp, I vaguely remember doing some research and asking the communities and different things like that to find out what size fuse I need to run with the fridge, and 20 amp seemed to be the right one. And again, it's been working since 2017. The only time I've ever had any issues is my ground wire came loose at one time, and I popped one of those fuses for some reason at one time. But other than that, I've had great success. All right, so quick recap, and then I'll get to that bonus that I promised you at the beginning of the video. We took an 8-gauge 12-volt wire, the length that we need for our application. In my case, it was quite long because I'm going from the very front to the very back. We made a nice, secure, waterproof connection up on the positive terminal of the battery. Then we ran it to an inline 40-amp fuse close to the battery, which is, in my case, up underneath the hood there. And then from the other side of that inline fuse, we ran the wire through the firewall, under the carpet, behind the trim, all the way back to our fancy 6-slot fuse block here in the back. Now again, I use the term fancy very loosely. This fuse block is like half the price, if not a quarter of the price, of some of the other ones that come highly recommended from many different people. I don't really know what the difference is. I would assume that the other ones have some waterproofing or different things like that. At any rate, this has been working for the past 5 or 6 years, so this is the one that I would recommend. Again, the link is down in the description below. I really appreciate it if you guys use those links, whether or not you buy this one or the more expensive one. Now, after we've got power to our fuse block, we took our fridge cord that the fridge came with, and we found out which side's positive and which side's negative by hooking it up to a live 12-volt plug and then testing it with a voltmeter. In my case, the white lettering's positive and no lettering is negative. We then cut this off. I cut mine off at the very tip here. We stripped it back as well as pulled it apart. On the positive side, we used one of these style blade connectors, and on the negative side, we used one of these style round connectors, making sure that the size was appropriate for the size wire that we have. That's going to be on you because every application is different. We then found a nice secure ground, which we then hooked up the negative side with that round style connector to that secure ground. We then hooked our blade style connector, and then we plugged it in, we turned the power on, and made sure that we didn't blow up. I'm just playing with you. You're probably not going to blow up. About the worst that can happen if you do this wrong is you'll like blow a fuse or something, which is like $5 or $10. But you're going to want a thing of those fuses anyway. So definitely go ahead and get you some of those little blade fuses that fit your fancy 6-slot or 10-slot, 2-slot or 1-slot fuse block. And that's it. You've got full-time power. And whether or not you want to power just your fridge, or you want to power your fridge and then some other outlets like I have here, or you want to do some fancy lights, or I actually had a 12-volt fan plugged in there at one time that I knocked off with a bike that I was transporting. It's a long story. But anyway, this is how you have full-time power in the back of your rig. Now let's get to that bonus I promised. So normally the stock alternator that you see right there, it is stock, even though it's been replaced recently. That's the stock size. That stock alternator is actually only going to charge at somewhere around the 13 to 13.5 volts, but I've got a trick to get a little bit more juice out of it. Now, whether or not this works on your vehicle, I don't know. You're going to have to, again, do some research. I do know that this works on many different Toyotas, and it will definitely work on the Toyota 4Runner, a 5th gen Toyota 4Runner, because, well, that's what I'm using it on. So what you're going to do is you're going to find this fuse block, you're going to take the cap off, then you're going to look at the diagram, and you're going to find the alternator, which is, well, located right there. And you'll notice that I've already switched it out, but this is actually a GM diode, and I don't know how it works or the ins and outs. I just know that a tip that was provided to me by some other Toyota guys. And what this does is this allows the alternator to charge at like 14.5 instead of 13 to 13.5. Why is that beneficial? Well, normally a 12-volt battery with the standard alternator setup, whenever I'd get to camp, it would show that I had somewhere around 12 to 12.4 volts back there on the voltmeter. Whenever I get to camp now, I often see 13 or 12.9 volts, which just means that my battery is super duper charged. Also, some people will tell you with a deep cycle battery, you're never really charging it, and this and that, and blah, blah. I don't know. All I know is that with this little GM diode trick, I'm able to charge at like 14 to 14.5 volts as I'm riding down the road, and whenever I get to camp, I'm extra fully charged on my deep cycle battery. Perfect timing. I was able to get the video done before it turned dark and before it started raining, so I call that a win in my book. I really appreciate you guys watching. Remember, all the links for everything you need to do this project, with the exception of that battery, are going to be listed down in the description below, and by using those links, you do help support the channel, so I really appreciate it. I hope that you guys learned something by watching this video. If you did, make sure that you hit that thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button if you want to follow my adventures, and until next time, you guys keep hanging in there like a hair on a biscuit, and remember, you can be happy if you've a mind to. Peace, y'all.